It's working. I'll tell you, I've been at the Government Digital Service for 4 or 5 years, mostly working on assisted digital. Hands up if you've heard of assisted digital. Hands up if you know what it is. Better than me. No idea. So sometimes I do slides and it says assisted digital lead. Sometimes I cross that out and put inclusive services lead because in a nutshell, the work we're doing at GDS is reviewing how good assisted digital has been at making services inclusive. And so I'm trying to drag our thinking a bit more broadly than support for people who aren't very good at using the internet. And that's really what I'm going to talk to you about today. I've just realised I don't have my notes. Right. Hello. Brilliant. So yeah, that's what I was prattling on about before, was a little bit of how I've got to be inclusive services lead, sort of by default coming out of assisted digital, or still working on assisted digital. So for those who don't know, the Government Digital Service is part of the Cabinet Office that concerns itself with the design and delivery of primarily central government services in the digital age, so we call those digital services. I'm not sure I'm going to frame the evening, but I have 5 observations about this area that I would like to share with you about inclusivity before we hand over to our speakers. Martin's cracked this one already. Firstly, why should government services be inclusive? Short answer is they have to be. Thank you, Janet Hughes, for the slide, which many of you have seen. Yeah, government is not a shop. We have to be inclusive. We can't pick and choose customers. Our services have to work for everyone properly, however they need to use them. We cannot exclude or discriminate at all. There's also the law. So the Equality Act rams that home. It legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and in wider society. So we as government cannot be exclusive. There's also the service standard, which is a standard that central government services have to meet before they can get onto gov.uk. And that requires services to provide assisted digital support offline to users who need it, and for services to be accessible online for users with disabilities and impairments. Winding back, there's the design principles which underpin those standards and our approach to service design and service building across government. And I think it's good to sometimes remember exactly what I think these are trying to call out when they were written. It's probably people in the room who wrote them, so be careful about that. But build digital services, not websites. Our job is to uncover user needs and build a service that meets those needs. Much of that will be pages on the web, but we're not here to build websites. We have to think about all aspects of a service and make sure they add up to something that meets user needs. It feels like a really good time in government now to check back into the principles there and see if that's what we're still doing. Second thought is defining inclusion. So it's such an amorphous phrase and means different things to different people in different situations. Sometimes that can be really helpful, and sometimes I think it can work against inclusion perversely. So being inclusive can mean including certain groups of people when you're considering the design of something. Blog post on gov.uk there about being inclusive of people with visual impairments when researching the needs around a service. It can be implied. Inclusivity can be implied by the way we talk about things that are actually narrower in scope than you might think of if you're talking about broad inclusion of users. In this example, in this blog post, we're talking about testing on a wide range of devices, but really we mean a wide range of internet-enabled devices. It's not a problem, but it presumes that is an inclusive array of ways that users might interact with government. We can also be inclusive in terms of the journeys we consider, or the breadth, the start and the finish points of the journeys that users are on when they are interacting with government and using our services. So the full user journey, as presented by Alice Mathers from the Good Things Foundation recently, is kind of reflects a lot of what we're talking about in government of end-to-end service design. I would say that is inclusive that way, but I'm not sure it's inclusive deep, because it's essentially still a journey where the user ends up using your stuff online on their own, which may not be what works for all users. So I think there's a simple way to start with inclusion. I think we mean available, as in I can get to it. Physically, I can get to the thing. And effective, so once I've got to it, it works for me. But do we mean available and effective for users who are online? I think sometimes we do. Do we mean available and effective for users with protected characteristics? That's definitely important, and we need to bear in mind the needs of those groups, all sorts of groups, vulnerable users and so on, when designing. Do we actually mean available for users and cost-effective for government, which I sometimes think is a strong channel shift, digital take-up stuff, kind of pushes us towards make it work for them and cheap for us mentality? Or do we just mean available and effective for everyone? And to expand that, massive words, available and effective for all users across whatever devices and channels they need during their end-to-end journey. So that encompasses all the providers, all the ways, all the channels, all the time. So thought 3, how inclusive are services at the moment? So we did some research last year when we were reviewing assisted digital's policy intentions of inclusion. And the interactions people have to have with government offline are way less likely to be good, to be user-centered, and insofar as they're not likely to be based on good user research, they're rarely iterated, they aren't being tested with users, the success of them by any measure is rarely measured, too many measures. We also saw how the online focus as a channel of digital transformation sometimes leads to teams who are actually under-scoped to build what we're now talking about as end-to-end services and that full breadth of service delivery. So our ability to actually build inclusive services in the place which across the breadth that people need them is actually limited by a narrow view of digital, the word digital, the concept of digital transformation, digital services, that just blocks people from being able to take full responsibility for everything within an end-to-end service. It seems that we forget that digital doesn't just mean online. So, fourth observation is that while assisted digital remains a kind of niche and weird and irritating thing to lots of people, everywhere I look in GDS, certainly in GDS and across government and even in the third sector organisations we're working with, is thinking more and more about designing services that work wherever users need them, rather than where we would most like to put them. The user-centered design community itself, you lot, us lot, is a great example of that, encouraging inclusion even just by helping government to focus on user needs first all the time. The accessibility community, looking at inclusion in terms of web accessibility and more than web accessibility, but a large and vibrant community, more than 700 members, lots of online discussions in that community, regular and well-attended meetups. I was gonna call you a rock star in this, Alistair, but I took that out because I was going to say, to me, accessibility in the community and Alistair driving that is like kind of the rock star of GDS inclusivity, but I won't say that. And there are big scary directives from the EU around accessibility that's driving a lot of interest in that community and in inclusion, in the area of inclusion. By 2020, all public sector websites must be accessible. So there are going to be lots more people in that room needing to work out how to do that. We started talking in government about a broader approach to service design, about building digital services a while ago. This is Lou Down back in 2016. I always think this must be a few months ago, but it's not. So she's talking about whole services and the end-to-endness of whole services and the every channelness of all whole services. And then we see that language cropping up in the transformation strategy from the government transformation strategy last year. Again, recognising that services come across many channels and committing government to designing and delivering joined-up end-to-end services by 2020. We've started to update the service standards to reflect that and the service manual. Teams everywhere now seem to be looking at how to make the things work better wherever people find them and whatever their needs may be. I think the new standard is going to be a brilliant example of that. Will's here, Will and Tom working on service communities, which again in another way is inclusion, because we were talking about how do you join up the communities and organisations across that whole end-to-end journey to provide that inclusive service. So my final observation, which is a provoker maybe, is do we actually have an inclusive and user-centred view of users? So I've been pondering this a lot, and we've done a lot of research analysing why people get excluded from services. And we're working across the user research community at the moment to sort of think about this more. But are we actually thinking about users in ways that kind of make us exclusive by default? So a lot of service design seems, or has historically seemed, to lead with a delivery-centred view of users. People who are doing the thing online on their own, people who need some help to do the thing online, people who are doing it in another terrible way, accessibility people, and just people who are not using the service at all, who need some channel shifting and motivating. These are a lot of the thinking I see is structured around that bare bones model. It's really important to consider the needs of certain demographics and characteristics of users. And it's easy to take a characteristic-centered view of users, be that thinking about people who are offline or disabled, homeless, transgender, poor mental health. That could have a very, very long list there. Again, I wonder if those, if applying these labels then actually leads us to think exclusively, despite the intention to be inclusive. So what we're floating around the user research community within government and outside of government is there a way to lead our research and subsequent design that is more universally applicable and would still capture and meet the needs of vulnerable users, protected characteristics, non-vulnerable users, and everyone, basically, for truly user-centered design. At the moment, we're sort of working around that list, which we think captures all the reasons that I might not have a happy experience with your service or just be fully excluded from it. So it's a segmentation that we're thinking about, segmentation that applies to all users of every service in every situation, relevant across all characteristics, demographics, and user groups. And that's what I'll leave you with. So over to our speakers. Who's up first?